Hi all, this is Professor Ian. Welcome to week 3 of English 1B, the 14-week version. So this is my usual Monday video where I talk about what we did last week, talk about what's coming out this week. And so last week we got into a lot of concepts. We got into the classical appeals. Let me just say off the top, usually when people talk about the classical appeals, they're talking about ethos, pathos, logos. I threw in kairos. It's kind of like the little stepbrother of the classical appeals family. It's definitely a term that Aristotle and other classical rhetoricians talked about and is part of this conversation. But it's not usually part of that essential triangle people talk about. Some people talk about this being a new concept, and that's part of it. But kairos is a super important rhetorical concept to keep in mind. That the kind of timing of a piece of rhetoric is super important, right? And often is part of that rhetorical situation that we're talking about, that context that goes on around a text of any kind. So we looked at those. We also looked at the rhetorical situation, and soapstone is a kind of tool to help us think about that. Soapstone is just a tool. You could approach this in different ways. I've seen different acronyms, different methods for thinking about this: rhetorical triangle, rhetorical hexagon. I don't know. There's all kinds of different models. Personally, I like soapstone. I love acronyms that force you to kind of step back from something and go through a list, because it kind of slows down your thinking about something, and it gets you to consider with more time different aspects of, in this case, a piece of the rhetorical impact or rhetorical context of a text. So I really like that approach to things. There's different tools to think about this idea of the context of a piece of rhetoric. Likewise, when we're talking about the classical appeals, ethos, pathos, logos, kairos, right? These are not things that exist in the universe, right? Like trees and the sun. These are terms that we use to describe human communication and human psychology, I guess you could say. So they're just tools, right? Don't get too wedded to that and think, oh, it has to fit one of these slots that I have, because as we see in the text that I gave you, especially the King text, he's often merging things and flipping back and forth very quickly between these kinds of appeals and combining them in very important ways. And we're going to see also, as we get further into the semester, how this is complicated by our epistemological understanding of the world, like what we consider to be facts, what we weigh heavier as facts. There's a fascinating book. It's called, what is it called? Imaginary Kingdoms. I can't remember. I'll have to post it later. It's by Oliver and Wood. We're going to read an essay by them about conspiracy theories, but they have a book out that's about the different ways that Americans understand the world. Some people are more given to, want to consider the world through facts and figures and expertise, and some people are more convinced by anecdotes and intuition, right? And so there's this very different epistemological, and epistemology just means like a system of knowledge, right? The philosophy of knowledge. So what counts as knowledge? How we understand what is more important as knowledge, like facts and figures or intuition, emotions, right? So anyways, there's this very deep psychological bias that people have towards one or the other, which is also very interesting and complicates our conversation of these classical appeals. We're reviewing the classical appeals this past week, and in essay number 1 this week, as a way to set the ground, the base for the rest of our conversations for the rest of the semester. Which is, I was very happy to see in the Flipgrid, a lot of people talked about having encountered the appeals a long time ago. One person even talked about first learning about the appeals in grade 5. And other people talked about grade 6, freshman English, English 1A, of course. And that's all great. I think that's fantastic that people have encountered this before. Same with soapstone. People talk about encountering soapstone and the idea of fallacies, right? These are obviously not concepts I came up with. And, the reason why we're doing them week 2 of the course is to set that, that base, and to review, for a lot of people, just to review this stuff, get us in the mood to talk about, to complicate the conversation, and talk about how these things are used in a contextual or a contemporary context. And in this idea, this case study we're going to look at with conspiracy theories and misinformation that's so prevalent today. So I was happy that it's all review. If it wasn't review for it, that's great too. Even for some people that said it was a review. I noticed a couple people kind of confusing ethos and pathos and things like this. And, that's why it's good to go over these things many times, because they are different things. And, it's important to continually discuss them. Plus, they're foundational ideas. You can never discuss them too many times. Just one other note with the fallacies. I noticed a couple people talked in their response on the concept quiz. They noted that they learned about the 12 kinds of fallacies. There are, as many fallacies as you want to define in the world. If you Google it, you should Google, like fallacies. There's great sites about this stuff. I think I linked some in my notes. But I only go over 12 or 13. Did I do 13? I can't remember. I think I added one, my Dirty Baker's Dozen. Maybe it's 12. Anyways, those are just 12 that I found were important, that you see all the time. People can get really granular with this idea of fallacies, but it's not. If you find it interesting, you should definitely dive into it, and be prepared if you're going to study more rhetoric to get into it. And it's fun. Don't get me wrong, but it's also, again, fallacies is just a tool for us to understand the way that people manipulate, either deliberately or accidentally, right? Because fallacies aren't all about being malicious and trying to persuade someone through manipulation. Sometimes we use scare tactics because, we are emotional about a topic and we're trying to convince someone we're afraid too, but, we're going too far, or we think that our slippery slope argument is logically sound, but it's not. This happens all the time. So, fallacy doesn't mean maliciousness. It just means kind of error in logic or reasoning. So that's what we were talking about, the concepts. A lot of that, again, was a review, which is great. If it's new, totally new, that's also great. We're going to complicate all these ideas as we go through the semester. I just read through your fallacies and that's fallacious discussion. They were fun. People are having fun with that. I hope that was fun for you. I obviously watched your flip grids. And I just wanted to talk quickly about the 2 articles I gave you to read, or 2 texts. One is, let's start with the letter from Birmingham Jail. This is the classic MLK Jr. Text. And this is, he does, he's such a master of rhetoric. He's switching back and forth. He does a lot of really interesting combinations, you might think, of these classical appeals. And if we were to apply soapstone to this, there's some interesting things to think about too, because the occasion for which he is writing, right? He's been jailed after these demonstrations in Birmingham, and there's this letter that's been written and published by a group of clergymen from the area, and they accuse him of being a kind of what he calls an outside agitator. So someone coming in from the outside just to cause trouble and doesn't have a stake in the actual debate that's happening there. And there was some discussion on perusal. This is something that happens all the time when we're discussing these kinds of like public conversations, right? Like, who is allowed to have a part in this conversation? Who's an outsider? Who's an insider? This is very much an ethos question, right? Like, who is a credible member of that society or that community and is able or is, should be part of the conversation? For example, right now there are these trucker demonstrations happening in Canada, right, where I'm from. I'm Canadian. I don't know if I've talked about that, but back in our capital city of Ottawa, there are these truckers who are, basically blockaded the city, and they blockaded the bridges going to the States, and they're demonstrating. And what's interesting is that you have, American, right-leaning American conservatives are jumping in on this and supporting them and becoming part of this conversation. And there's a question, a lot of Canadians are frustrated by this. They're like, well, why does Sean Hannity care about what we're doing in Ottawa, right? Is this part of a conversation he should be part of? Is he an outside agitator, or, should he be part of this? Because this is like a transnational issue. There's a protest about COVID stuff, so this is affecting the world. So does Sean Hannity have a role in this? Should he be able to have a part of this conversation about truck blockades in Ottawa? Right? Is he this outside agitator like the clergymen accuse Dr. King of being? And so I just wanted to address that because that came up in the conversation. But just take a quick look at some of the things he's doing. This we talked about in your Flipgrid videos, that which is the most important appeal, and that's kind of an artificial question because they're all more important and more useful. Useful is probably a better term to use here, in different contexts. And we can see how King uses them differently, right? So he doesn't just use pathos or just use logos or ethos. he's using all this stuff to appeal in different ways for different arguments he's making. And so you notice right away he's using a lot of ethos. He's establishing his credibility. Oftentimes, we don't want to, we won't listen to someone's facts, even if they're really sound, if we don't trust the person. And that's not a bad choice. If someone comes to you and they're a bad actor and you know that they manipulate and they lie about this stuff, then why would you listen to them when they come up with facts? Because the facts are probably suspect, right? Just because something is presented as a fact doesn't mean that it's, as trustworthy. So the ethos is an important part that underlies a lot of logos, right? That combination of ethos and logos is usually super important. If you don't trust the person, how do you trust the facts, right? And a lot of the times when we cite facts, say in your papers, you present a study and then you cite it, and then you have to have that in your citations, and that a lot of that is ethos, right? Because you're saying, hey, here's the fact, here's where I got it. This person that I got it from, this organization, is trustworthy. They're a neutral organization that does research. They're not some kind of like right-wing or left-wing think tank that's presenting a biased take on this. No, this is a credible source for this information. So you can trust the logos because you trust the ethos. So there's often this combination of these two appeals, and we see that immediately in the King essay, or the King letter, I should say. As well, we do get this Kairos, right? Because he's making this appeal to the moment. Hey, I'm in jail. I'm usually too busy to do this, to answer these kinds of piddly little complaints, right? I'm too busy fighting the good fight. So there's very much he's setting him, speaking to the moment, right? And the occasion, he's directly, again, responding to these clergymen who wrote this letter, and that's why he gets into stuff about outside agitation and really lays out what he's doing. This gives him the opportunity to really lay out his steps in a non-violent campaign, right? Because he's being accused of inciting violence, and he says, well, I'm not violent. I'm just trying to create what he calls creative tension, right? And he goes through the very logos-based explanation of what he's trying to do here. And then he uses a lot of pathos, too, to really, humanize the argument. It's like, he's making the point that, hey, I'm a trustworthy person, even though I'm not from this area. I've been asked to come in. I'm part of all this larger community. Here's our logical way that we're going about this. We're not trying to just create violence. We're trying to solve this problem. And here, and this is a great example of when he gets into the logos, he's, detailing the kind of injustices that black people were facing at the time. And so it's a long paragraph that builds and builds, and he's using this, I linked this idea in a lot of the conversations, anaphora, which is a rhetorical device that's used, and it's basically the repetition of a phrase at the beginning or the middle or the end of a sentence, and it creates like a rhythm. In this case, it really builds the pathos, right? When, he uses a lot, when you take a cross-country drive and this happens, when your first name becomes this, when you are harried by day and harried by and haunted by night, etc., right? So there's this building he's doing through anaphora, and it adds to the pathos because it just piles on these injustices that he's cataloging. So, anyways, I just wanted to talk about that the way that he's really combining and switching back and forth between appeals and that. Quickly, with the Obama speech, he does a lot of the same things. You can see the anaphora he's using later. He's talking about together. And there's a lot of we and together in Obama's speech that you don't see in the King one, right? Because King is explaining his position. Obama's trying to, as the president, be this uniter. And you can see this real appeal to Kairos at the beginning, to this moment. He's not just giving a speech. This is a moment of the celebration of democracy in America, as he portrays it, right? And he is just there to be the person that's helping to celebrate it, right? And that's why his speech has impact. He's arguing here. He's making that appeal. So anyways, I don't want to go over the 15 minutes that limited on Screencast-O-Matic. So briefly, this week we are getting into the proofreading. So please post your rough draft by Wednesday. If you have questions about it, there's a student sample right here, and you can email me, come on my office hours. We can make time before Wednesday if you want to chat. I'm around. And remember, there's also an exit poll just to reflect on what we've been doing this part of the semester. And other than that, I hope you have a good week. I hope you have fun writing the essay. It's meant to be a little bit more creative and fun. So, yeah, Please email me if you have any questions or concerns. Thank you very much.